Today, the Election Commission announced that they will not be able to hold local government elections on the 21st, 22nd, and 23rd as scheduled. The reason is because the government printer has refused to print the ballot papers unless the Election Commission pays rupees 400 million upfront. This is extremely sad state of affairs because this is obviously something very unusual. If you look at all the past elections running to decades, there had never been a situation where the government printer was paid in advance by the Election Commission. I checked the last 4-5 elections, and at every election, the government printer was paid by the Election Commission at least 4 months after the election. Why? That is because the government printer belongs to the government, and the Election Commission also gets funds from the government. So obviously, it is taking from one hand and giving to another. There's nothing called that you can't trust the Election Commission because Election Commission doesn't generate money. It has to give the money that comes from the Treasury, and the government printer is accountable to the Treasury. So why is this happening? That is obviously because the government does not want this election to be held. It knows definitely that it is going to get exposed at this election and it is going to lose. So is it something that you can allow? Constitutionally, the people of this country have a right to vote, and particularly when an election is due on time. The local government election is due in March. That's a constitutional requirement. So can the government postpone that by saying that they don't have money? At which point do we allocate money for an election? That's done at a budget. The last budget was passed in December 2022. Wasn't there money for the election allocated in that budget? Yes, there was. So here I'm showing you, this is page 20 of the budget estimates, approved budget. Now in this, very clearly, Election Commission has been allocated rupees 10.9 billion. Now in the previous year, what Election Commission worked was something like 900 million. The year before also about 900 million. So now why has the government allocated 10.9 billion this time? That is because obviously at the time the budget was prepared, everybody knew the local government election is to be held in March. So now if the government comes and says that we don't have money to do this, then the government has to go home because you can't manage at least your 3 months affairs. You can't project at least 3 months ahead. On the other hand, there's an interesting argument put forward by some people that government doesn't have money. So if government has to do this, it has to borrow. Is it anything very unusual? No, it is not unusual. It's the normal practice. It's always the case that the government borrows money to cover government expenditure. How much was the original estimate of government revenue this year? It was rupees 3,415 billion, the estimated government revenue. What was the estimated cost of the government for 2023? It is 5,890 billion. So there was a budget deficit of 2,404 at the time of approving the budget. At the time of approving the budget. So government estimated its cost knowing very well that its income is not sufficient to meet this expenditure requirement. So from where was government going to find money? Obviously by borrowing. So that was part and parcel of the plan. Now wasn't government borrowing for the last 2 months? Now we are in February. Look at 15th February, just a couple of days ago, at the Treasury bill auction, 85 billion government has asked for. And there are bids for 124 billion and government borrowed 70 billion. So this is the normal practice. The borrowing continues. If the government wanted to give this 10 billion, it could have been released quite easily. Because what is 10 billion? 10 billion out of 5,819 billion estimated expenditure is only 0.17%. Now the Election Commission had told they don't even need 10 billion. They said told that they'll manage it with 8 billion or even less. So now what is 8 billion? Look at this way. If you take the total government expenditure for the year, 365 days, Divide that expenditure by 365, you get 16 billion. That's the cost of the government per day. And the election commissioner says they can cover this cost within 8 billion, which means it's just cost of half a day. With half a day's cost, the government can cover this election. So, but the government is projecting as if it's so difficult. The government has to spend money on medicine, food, and so many other things. So, if election is not held, this money can be utilized for that purpose. Whom are they fooling? They can fool people who have no knowledge of this budgeting process, but they can't fool intelligent people. I assume you are intelligent. The budget, once allocated for a particular purpose, cannot be used for any other purpose unless you go to the parliament and change the budget. That is how it works. So if money has been allocated for election, there's no way that money can be used for medicine. There's no way that money can be used for food. There's no way that money can be used for children's schooling requirements. So if somebody comes and tells you that, obviously a lot of MPs, ministers come and tell you that, they think you are stupid. They think the general public are stupid. But I think they are actually stupid to come and tell something like that. So please understand, there's no way what is allocated for election can be used for any other purpose. So in summary, the government has allocated this money at the last election. Government knew very well 10.9 billion is required. That money was allocated. That money has to come from borrowings, and the government has been borrowing money, and the government had planned to borrow 2,404 billion during this year. So out of which this 10 billion is nothing unusual, and the government printer has always printed ballot papers without waiting for election commission to pay. This is the first time the government printer has come up with this kind of a theory that is due to government pressure. So obviously what's happening is this government is taking away your franchise, your right to vote. So as an intelligent citizen, please do not agree to this. Reject this outright. Because if you lose this, there will be no more elections in this country.